So, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to see you this morning. I'm sorry about that. I had to take a phone call. My son is currently in Michigan. She called me during the sermon, too, but it's not her fault. It's the lady that owns the house where my son and his friends are all living at the moment. Michael drove to Michigan to become a lineman, not an offensive lineman. He's too small for that. But to be, climbing poles, yeah. So, but they were at this, and they're installing for a new subdivision, actually. But apparently the hotel they were in was not, like the company put them up because they move them around a lot. Like they do a project and then 2-3 weeks later they go, we're going to Illinois, or they think Illinois will be where they'll go next maybe, but they're working through all that. And apparently it's like really fluid. They're like, okay, we're done here. And they give them like a day's notice. But they were paying for this hotel, but Michael's like, Dad, we don't feel safe here and all that. So I went to Verbo and I found this house nearby, and it's on a lake in Michigan. It's on a lake just a mile from them, but it was only like $150 a night. Is a 5-bedroom too, so their whole team could stay there. But the reason it's so inexpensive is that it is on a lake, but that lake is currently completely frozen. So, so it's a lake, but it doesn't have quite the lake. Something tells me in the summer this is actually a pretty popular house because it's right on, like it backs up to the lake. But during the winter, it's probably not quite as popular. I'm going out on a limb here. Anyway, I was trying to rent them for 5 more days because they're staying now halfway between Detroit and Ann Arbor. And it's a little place called Belleville. Never heard of it, but it's a little place. It's a spot on the highway between Detroit and Ann Arbor. And so they're running this cable. They're not even hooking it up. Someone else is going to come in later and plug it in. Right now they're just running the cables out there. And I'm not sure what they're putting in. But he has had to climb a couple of poles, but I don't know if it's because they were repairing stuff or because they're putting him through training, because this is a certification program. He works for 7 months and with this internship thing, and then he can take the test and be certified after the 7 months. You can do that, or you can go to school. You can go to school for 15 weeks in Dallas, or you can do a 7-month internship and you get certified, but you take the test then at the end of it and you get certified. And so he's doing the certification thing, he and his buddies. So, but I was like, she called me this morning because I wanted them to have 5 more days because they're working this week. So I checked with the lady. And I used Verbo to book it, but if you try to book within 24 hours, Verbo won't let you have that day. So I could book the end of the week, but I couldn't get tonight. So she called me and just said, just send me a check. It's like, okay, which is super sweet. I'm trustworthy, so it'll be fine. But, I'm trustworthy. I'll send her a check for sure. She'll get her money. Yes. So anyway, well, no, I'll write her a check. But anyway, so sorry about that. She called me and I was like, man, I better take care of this because I didn't want them to get kicked out because they're working at 10. They do 10-hour days, 4 days a week, and they usually do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 10-hour days. Take Wednesday off, but sometimes I look at the calendar and it was like sleet and freezing rain all day Tuesday, so they didn't do Tuesday. But it's cold up there. I don't know if you knew this, but Detroit, Michigan area is cold. I didn't know. Who knew? Yeah, who knew? Who knew that last week of January in Detroit, Michigan would be somewhat on the cold side? I didn't know. So yeah. It's, below zero, and the wind chill, his first day of work was -20, and he's climbing a electrical pole at -20-degree wind chill. Yeah, I'm sure it's even colder at the top of that pole than it is at the bottom, yeah. All right, well, so today I gave you a handout, and it's the views of the millennium. So there's a few things we need to accomplish today. We're going to read Revelation 21-10. I'm then going to go back over Ichthus because I got the acrostic wrong. So I want to make sure I give it to you correctly. And then, the little use of the fish as the symbol of the church. For the first 300 years, the symbol of the fish. After that, the cross did become dominant. But before that, it was the fish. And so I mentioned that last week, but I got the acrostic wrong, so I want to get that right. and I'll show it to you. And yeah, in fact, Doug was really kind. He sent me this article. It's very interesting. It had some quotes. I thought it was interesting too. It had some quotes from Augustine about that, which he's one of the Latin fathers, and so you get the quote from him. But just some of the idea of both baptism and new life, and Jesus becoming like one of us is almost like entering into the sea as a fish, or these kinds of imageries that the early church pictured. But the cross stick, I think, drew a lot of attention, and also the ease with which you can draw a fish is just two curved lines intersecting, and it's because of that that also made it really easy to label your headstone, or what drawings or writings or things like that. It's very easy to draw it, just like the cross is actually really easy to draw as well. So a fish? You got a fish when you join? Oh, yeah, on the back of the car. You didn't mean an actual fish. I was trying to figure out if you were going to First Bass Fishing Church of Texoma. First Bass Fishing Church of Texoma. You join, they hand you a fish. Yeah. If you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him to fish, he will then spend all of his time, money, and energy on bait, tackle, and boats. So I don't know. It's very tough. I don't think that's how that saying goes, but that's really how it works out in America. That it works that way in America. Yes. But yeah. All right. That's funny. I asked this lady. I said, they're linemen or whatever. She goes, "Oh, that's funny. I thought they were ice fishermen." So I don't know what they've been doing on that lake. I don't know if the four of them out there trying their hand at ice fishing. This is how Texans die in cold weather, right? This is where, they don't know what they're doing. This is how they die. They're going to go sit on a frozen lake and minus 20-degree wind chill and go fishing. This is how Texans die in Michigan right there. So that's what she just said. I've got to ask Michael about this. Have y'all been cutting holes in the lake? I don't know. They're leaving permanent damage. I said, don't leave any holes in anything. And now I found out they are cutting holes in the lake. So it will recover, though, I bet. I bet it will cut holes in the lake? It doesn't freeze over. Bill, are you asking me a logical question about a 20-year-old?
Well, I tell you what, my grandson does that.
Does he? He want a couple of workers, because these guys are tired of minus 20, I think. Oh, really? Yeah. There's a school in Dallas, and it's the Tulsa Welding School, which is weird because it's not in Tulsa and you don't do, they do welding, but it's not in Tulsa and you do lineman training. It's 15 weeks, $8,000. But you get a job, certified. They certify you in a bunch of stuff too. You also have to have a commercial driver's license. I think the bucket trucks they drive around, they make you have a commercial license. If he's looking for workers, let me know, because their experience right now has been frustrating. And, a few weeks into it, and they're a bit frustrated with the situation. But it's fine. They're 20. They're figuring stuff out. One's 20, one's 22, one's 23. And the three of them are figuring this out. And there's one other guy that's like the local or something, or came with them or something. I don't know. I don't know the story. Not my business. But they're trying to become linemen.
Do they work with the crew?
They are the crew. They have a boss. They have a supervisor who's 24. And Michael describes him as being somewhat of a knucklehead. And he told him, he's like, "I don't like this company. We're all moving to Illinois." And they're like, "What?" And he goes, and they don't have a choice. They have to go with him. He's the only one. He's certified not just as a lineman, but as someone who can train linemen. And the only way they can keep their job is if they attach themselves to him. But they think he's a knucklehead. So I don't know what to do with them. So if you got someone that's a lineman that's looking for three people who probably have at least now 3 weeks of experience, and it's experience in pretty cold weather, they're your guys. Yeah, they're your guys. I think they're ready to come. They're fine there, but they'd be looking for a new spot. So yeah, let me know.
I'll call him and ask him if he needs anything.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they have a little bit of experience too. It wouldn't be like hiring someone off the street. They've climbed the poles, they've run the cables, so they at least have a little experience now. And they're cold weather experience too. Not that that's going to matter in Texas, but yeah. All right, so yeah, my kids. I thought when they became adults that the stress level would go down. I really did. I thought, man, they'll become adults and my responsibilities will drop dramatically. I have found the exact opposite. It is more stressful than ever. He's like, Dad, this hotel's got bed bugs. We got to get out of here. It's not safe. We're all going to get our trucks broken into. Can you find us a place? So now I'm on Verbo trying to find these knuckleheads somewhere to stay. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know anything about Belleville, but they like the rent house though. They said it's really nice. They like it. They feel safe there, and it's in this little neighborhood right up that backs up to this little lake, and it's pretty isolated. They like it. Of course they like it. It's $150 a night. Like, we like that one. So now they're paying me for some of it, but not all. Yeah, I'm supplementing their living right now. That's the other thing. I'm like, I'm ready for them to. No. That's what she said. She goes, oh, you're looking after them. She's like, well, why don't you just give me the money when you're here? I was like, I'm not anywhere near Bellevue, Michigan. She's like, what? I'm like, it's a long story. I'm renting from my son and his coworkers. And she's like, oh, you're a good dad. I was like, or an idiot. The evidence on that remains to be seen. So, yeah, good dad who is a complete idiot. That's, I think, where we're headed with this. But anyway, yeah. All right. Oh, my goodness. I know, it's online. But my son is not watching. He's out ice fishing, apparently. All right, Revelation 20, 1-10. Then an angel coming down from heaven holding the key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand, and he took hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he threw him into the abyss and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he would not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were completed. After these things he must be released for a short time. Then I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received the mark on their foreheads or on their hands. And they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who is in part of the first resurrection. Over these the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and he will reign with him for 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison, and he will come out and deceive the nations which are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore. And they came up on a broad plain of the earth that surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone. And the beast and the false prophet are also. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So that's that's the millennial reign, the millennial text in the book of Revelation. It's the only place 1,000 years is used in time stuff that I'm aware of, at least from what I can tell. And it occurs several times though in this one text. You notice that? Like it's not like it's a one verse. That's the other thing, is sometimes I'll hear people say, it's just that one place. I'm like, yeah, except for he says it over and over. The 1,000 years is a big deal in this text. It's not a throwaway word. It's not a throwaway line. So it's a big deal. The 1,000 years, I think it showed up 4 times, maybe 5, I don't know. But like 4 times he says 1,000 years. After 1,000 years, they'll reign with them 1,000 years. Like 4 or 5 times in here, he brings up the 1,000 years. So it's a big deal, right? All right, a couple things. First of all, I mentioned something about the fish last week. Fish is spelled ichthus, I-C-H-T-H-U-S. And so it stands for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. ichthus. So it's an acrostic, only the letters are from Greek. Yeah. Or is it Latin? It is Greek. If you spell, that's the word fish, ichthus. That doesn't become a fish. It is a fish. Ichthus is a fish. Yes. That's the way you spell fish, apparently. Yeah. And an acronym. Oh, okay. Play on words. Yes. Yes. As opposed to a cross fish. But in this case, though, yeah, it's ichthus. I remember one of the funniest moments in Biblical Hebrew, the first week of Biblical Hebrew, we were learning the letters of the alphabet, okay? Learning the letters. And then we got our first word was the word for temple, hekal or something like that. And she wrote it on the board in Hebrew. Hey, something. I don't remember how it's spelled, hekal. But anyway, and we said it out loud, and or she wrote it on the board. And this guy raised his hand and says, he goes, when I pronounce that doesn't sound anything like the word temple. And I went, this guy has a long semester ahead of him. I don't know what he's expecting. Like it was just English written with Hebrew letters, I think was what he's expecting. Like the whole class was just going to be, it's the word temple spelled out with the Hebrew letter for T and E. And at that moment I went, oh, he is in for such a rude awakening. And I'm pretty sure he dropped the class after 3 weeks. And as soon as he said it, I went, he has never studied a foreign language in his life. I don't know if he knew how this works, but it's not just English with Hebrew letters. It's actually different words, a whole different vocabulary, different grammar. The whole thing's different. And so anyway, he asked that question. I just went, oh, no. Yeah, so ichthus is for fish. But it's frustrating because it doesn't look anything like the word fish. ICHTHUS doesn't look like FISH. That's a little frustrating. It doesn't look like the word fish. That's why you were going, that doesn't look like the word fish. What's wrong with you? No. It's the Greek word for fish. Yeah. You're like, the preacher's bad at spelling, but this is ridiculous. Yeah, Linda's like, I know he's bad at spelling, but this is a little bit ridiculous. All right. So it stands for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. And so ichthus is the Greek word that means fish. Yes, poor Linda. She's like, I'm never teaching Daniel Spanish. I know she and Steve are both like, maybe we could teach the preacher some Spanish. She's like, never mind. He's completely hopeless here. Yeah. All right, so we've read the text. Let's talk through these 7 views of the millennium. That's what we'll spend a little time doing today. I hate doing this, but I think it's helpful. These terms are thrown around pretty loosely. I mentioned to you last week, I did not appropriately footnote or credit the people that I got this information from because I don't remember. And because I drew it from a bunch of different sources, and some of it's my own language. So I don't know. If you read it, it's mostly from other sources. Some of it's from Wayne Grudem. Some of it's from Millard Erickson. Some of it's from this online website that I pulled some information that just was helpful, like the way they organized it. I was like, oh, that's kind of helpful. Some of it's from my notes from DTS, Dr. Zuck. And then some of it's just me. And if you say which words are which, I don't know. But I just don't want to get in trouble because, the presidents of these major universities are losing their jobs over plagiarism. I'm letting you know right now, this is plagiarized. I just don't know the source, okay? But since I'm not selling it, I'm not getting a PhD for it, I think we're okay, all right? But just educational purposes, I drew it from other sources, Grudem, Erickson, DTS, and Dr. Zuck, some other online source, and then every 100th word is mine. All right. So first of all, we deal with the amillennialism. So Revelation 21, and the amillennial view says that Revelation 21 to 10 describes the present age. Are there more of those handouts still? Here we go. Yeah, because we had a couple of more come in. Awesome. You guys already know this stuff, but you might want the handout just to know what we're talking about. Yeah. All right, so you're back. Ryan's back there like, I've already got this stuff. You want me to do this lecture for you? All right, so amillennialism is Revelation 21-10, describes the present church age, the millennium. The present church age will continue until the time of Christ's return. When Christ returns, there will be a resurrection of both believers and unbelievers, along with final judgment. Now, here's the difference between amillennialism and postmillennialism, is amillennialism tends to be a bit more pessimistic. It tends to be, it could get really ugly prior to this. It could devolve into worse and worse situation. Amillennialists are less optimistic than postmillennialists. Post-mill people tend to be a bit more optimistic. They view it the way, Jonathan Edwards is a classic example of this. Jonathan Edwards was post-mill, not all-mill. All-millennialism is seen in people like, I want to say Charles Spurgeon was all-mill. Does anyone know? You know if Spurgeon was all-mill? Because pre-mill and dispensationalism wasn't a thing when Spurgeon was pastoring. I think he may have been all-mill, which means he was a little bit more pessimistic about culture at large, which strikes me more because he was more Reformed too. Reformed people tend to be a little bit more pessimistic too. So they're like, God only elected so many. It's not going to get any better. Sorry. That kind of thing. Whereas all-mill tend to be a little bit more, post-mill tend to be a little bit more on the Arminian side, which is like, hey, the gospel, more and more people are going to believe, and, I don't know. I don't really care about those kinds of things on this, but I'm just telling you that my experience has been a little bit with that. That all-mill tends to be a little more pessimistic. Post-mill tends to be a little bit more optimistic. Other than that, I can't tell a lot of difference between the two views, all right? So amillennial says that we are currently in the millennium of Revelation 20. It's not a literal 1,000 years. It's 1,000 is just a nice big round number, a way to say, yeah, a long period of time. A definitive period of time, too. It has a start and an end. But the 1,000 isn't the emphasis, but just a long period of time is the view. And justification for this is that Simon Peter says to the Lord, one day is 1,000 years, is 1,000 years is a day. Is that some people use that justification to say, 1,000's not really the point here. Simon Peter said, a day is indistinguishable to God from 1,000 years. This isn't about the 1,000, it's about the period of time. Understand? So their view is that we're in the millennium, and that during that millennium, that this millennium, when it started is the question, though. When does it start? Does it start at Pentecost? Oh, this is one other thing. All of these that hold, well, preterism's a little stronger. Hyper-preterism and partial preterism a little stronger. Amillennial, post-mill either say this millennium started with the day of Pentecost or it started with the destruction of Jerusalem. You get both. Yeah. All right, questions? Yeah, amillennialism would say that the tribulation, it depends. There's varying degrees. Some people would say that tribulational period was before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. That's what it's describing. That tribulational period came to an end and ushered in the millennium, the amillennial period. Some amillennialists, I think, view the tribulation as coming at the end of this church age period, because I told you amillennials more pessimistic. Post-mill tend to view the tribulational time period being the 7 years around the city of Jerusalem's destruction. Amil's a little less specific on it. All-mill, I've heard both from all-mills, so they're a little less specific. Post-mill tends to be a little more specific, where they'll say the tribulation is the 7 years around the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, and we're now in this millennium. Things are going to progressively get better, so much so that Jesus will come back on the massive progress of the church. All-mill says, I'm not sure about this tribulation, whether it happened at 70 AD. All mills will sometimes be, day of Pentecost started the millennium, and it will end with kind of this tribulational period will come in there. So it just depends. I've heard both from all mill, in which case the book of Revelation is layered on top of itself. You know what I'm saying? Like these 1,000 years are retrospective back and covers the whole period of the church age. Yes, Richard. Yeah, okay, so Amil would say the reign of Christ is over his church and over the hearts of individual believers and in heaven itself. That's why Jesus' prayer, that your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, that the reign of Christ is taking place there. Post-mill will say the reign of Christ is here now, and it's in conflict with the reign of the devil. But it's not just in the hearts of believers in the church, but that the reign of Christ is growing like this parable of the kingdom, where it's the mustard seed but grows into this massive tree. Post-mill views the reign of Christ as more active in the world today. Amill would say, in the church, yes, and in the lives of believers, yes, but not at the world at large. Post-mill, again, is more optimistic, where Christ is right now encroaching on world systems, even now. We can't see all of the reign of Christ, but he's reigning right now very actively. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I just see it with
It's a great question. Thank you.
see the consistency there. You were talking about the world and politics and God's law. And
Yes.
trying to
Post-mill, yeah, so we're clear on this. Post-mill are hardcore politicians. Yeah, post-mills tend to be a lot more political. They will use political systems to inject the reign of Christ into the system at large right now. It'd be unfair to say, oh, it's the rise of Christian nationalism. Because Christian nationalism, honestly, isn't that thought out theologically on some of the stuff. This is a different group. This is a group, some of them may view themselves as Christian nationalists, but most of them view themselves as post-millennial, where the church is to reign in every aspect of the world system. And they try to interject themselves into public service, education, government, politics, entertainment. The idea is to infiltrate all of those, and the reign of Christ will expand in all those areas. So post-mill, again, is a lot more optimistic that Christians can have positive cultural results by infiltrating these secular institutes. All right? I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I'm just telling you what the views are. Some of you are like, that doesn't seem right, or, yeah, that sounds great. I don't care. I don't have a vote. I'm letting you know what the views are, okay? They're not monolithic either. I've dealt with some post-mills who don't view it that way. But generally speaking, all millennials tend to be more pessimistic and are like, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Christ reigns over the church and in my heart. Let's just hang on. And Jesus will come back, but it's going to be a bumpy ride. And post-mills are like, hey, let's take over the world with Judeo-Christian values. And whether people are Christians or not, at least the Judeo-Christian values will reign over the world. And in defense of the post-mill view, too, it would say this: if I love my neighbor, I want good for them, and Jesus is good for them. Whether they believe in him or not, he's still good for them. So we're going to force Jesus into as many places as we can. That's that idea. All right? Again, I'm not endorsing either view here. I have a view. I do. All right. So post-millennial, Christ will return after the millennium. The progress of so we're in the millennium now. The progress of the gospel and the growth of the church will gradually increase so that a larger and larger portion of the world's population will be Christian. This millennium will last a long period of time. At the end of this period, Christ will return to earth. When he returns, there will be a resurrection of both believers and unbelievers along with final judgment. In that regard, they're the same as Amil. Both of them end with the resurrection of both the saved and the damned and that kind of thing. But in postmillennialism, the church is expanding. This is Jonathan Edwards' view. Jonathan Edwards loved this, but he was very post-mill. Jonathan Edwards is like, we're going to inoculate the entire system with, whether overtly or covertly, Christian ideas, right? Jonathan Edwards is the precursor to American democracy too. He didn't mean to. But Jonathan Edwards is like, you're not saved because you go to the Church of England, and you're not saved because you're a member of a church or because you were baptized in the church. You're saved not because of some priest at the church or because of the church structure at large. You're saved because you individually believe the gospel. You go, well, what does that have to do with democracy? Well, Americans 100 years later went, well, if I have to answer to God for my soul directly, and I don't need to answer to a priest or to a church. I got to answer to God directly. Some of them woke up and went, then I don't need a king either. I'll govern myself, right? And so Edwards inadvertently introduced this whole idea. Mark Knoll does a spectacular job on this in his book, America's God, where he shows how Jonathan Edwards' theology of the competency of each individual soul, the need for each individual to be competent before God, to respond to God on their own, got involved in the American political system of colonists going, well, then we don't need a king. I should be able to govern myself. We don't need that king of England telling us what to do. I don't need the priest of England or the Church of England telling me what to do either. And so I'm going to answer to God directly for my soul, and I'm going to answer to myself and my neighbors about taxation and educate, right, that kind of thing. So, but Edwards was very optimistic about it. His view was that these things start infiltrating society, evangelical Christianity, and it changes things for the better. And we've seen that historically. It's actually happened. D.L. Moody is the greatest example of this. He went to England. England was a mess. It was about to dissolve into complete chaos. After he preaches there for a little less than a decade, he preached to millions, like the entire British Empire 3 times over by the time he left, because so many people came to hear him multiple times. And cities in Scotland shut down their police departments and turned them into quartets for the churches. No one was in jail. No one was in trouble. All the bars closed. It was unbelievable. Just the reforming work of the Spirit of God through the preaching ministry of D.L. Moody. The greatest revival of modern times was D.L. Moody in England, late 1800s. Just when he died, the London Times said, no person has had a greater impact on British society than D.L. Moody in the British Empire's history. That's a pretty amazing statement from the London Times. But ironically, D.L. Moody did not share Jonathan Edwards' optimism despite that experience. D.L. Moody is the source of modern premillennialism. He didn't teach it. He was a evangelical preacher. He just preached the gospel, which he was great at. And I wished I could have heard him preach. I mean, just incredible. But he had this theologian that joined him at the Moody, what becomes Moody Institute. And this guy introduces the idea known as premillennialism. Actually, ultimately dispensationalism, but we'll talk about that in a second. Moody starts these traveling schools, and this guy that's hanging out with Moody is this really good theologian, and he goes around and he starts teaching premillennialism. And it's perfect timing because Darwinism has now taken off in America, and Darwinism has all these charts where it's like there's this single cell amoeba, and then there's this more complex thing, and there's all these charts that show these things. Well, along comes premillennialism, and they also have charts. And they're like, there's this and this, and it looks very scientific. And the charts, when you compare them, it's crazy. You compare like these charts on evolution with these charts on premillennialism, they're very similar designs. It's like the church went, oh, we can draw charts too. And so D.L. Moody's got this theologian, and D.L. Moody Bible Institute started by all this too. They would have these conferences in Chicago, and people would have come from all over. And 2 of the disciples of that group, the one that's most important, is a guy by the name of Lewis Sperry Chafer. Lewis Sperry Chafer, ring a bell to anyone? Very, very important. He has a systematic theology, which is actually pretty good. Lewis Sperry Chafer leaves Chicago, comes to Dallas, and starts a theological institute. You know the name of it? Dallas Theological Seminary. Right. And he hires 2 professors that are critical to this. One by the name of Charles Ryrie. He wrote the Bible. It's called the Ryrie Study Bible. Anyway, he didn't write the Bible, but he does write. And his basic theology, by the way, is one of the best systematic theology books I've ever read. Yeah, just realize when you read Ryrie's basic theology, it's Ryrie's basic theology. He is going to tell you his views and no one else's. So in some ways it's nice because it's really simple. But a lot of times in systematic theology, they'll be like, there's 7 views of this. Ryrie will act like there's one view, it's right, and it's mine, and here it is. So in that regard, it's really simple because you don't get, here's the 5 views of this. Here are the 7 views of this. Ryrie just says, here's how it is. But it makes for a very simple read. It's about 400 pages, one of the most accessible systematic theology books I've ever read. You can pick it up, you can just read through it. It's very easy to read. It's called Basic Theology, Charles Ryrie. The other hire, though, by Louis Sperry Schaefer, was a guy by the name of Scofield. The Scofield Study Bible was the best-selling Bible in America for decades. And, and in the Scofield Study Bible, what gets ensconced in the theology of evangelicals and the best-selling study Bible in America, maybe in American history, I don't know, I have to go look. But I mean, he sold, Scofield Study Bible is the most popular study Bible. What's built into it is dispensational theology. He put it right in his notes. Well, these all start out with premillennialism in the D.L. Moody late 1800s, early 1900s. Louis Sperry Schaefer comes. 1905, I think, is when DTS starts. He moves down here. And like I said, Scofield and Ryrie are two of the hires by Louis Sperry Schaefer when he starts that institute. But premillennialism says this: the present church age will continue until, as it nears the end, a time of great tribulation and suffering comes on the earth. After that time of tribulation, at the end of the church age, Christ will return to earth to establish a millennial kingdom. Sorry, I had to put this on 2 slides. It was the longest. When he comes back, believers who have died will be raised from the dead. Their bodies will be reunited with their spirits, and these believers will reign with Christ on earth for 1,000 years. Christ will be physically present on the earth in his resurrected body and will reign as king over the entire earth. This holds the 1,000 years as a literal 1,000 years and as a future event. Most Southern Baptists are premillennial, has been my experience. Most modern Southern Baptists, historically Southern Baptists tended to be amill because they were a rather pessimistic group. No amount of potlucks could change it. Yeah. Whereas Presbyterians tended to be a little bit more optimistic and tended to be a little bit more post-mill. But Baptists, I think, were a lot of times more amill, less post-mill, because they're just pessimistic. Baptists are just pessimistic people. So, at least historically, yeah. And, all right. Now, dispensational theology is premillennialism with an added feature. I don't remember for sure, but I think there's 7 dispensations in dispensationalism. And oftentimes, dispensationalism is set in contrast to covenantal theology because it doesn't just deal with end times, it deals with God's interaction with humanity over all of time. The 7 dispensations are prior to the law, during the law, up until the Pentecost. I mean, there's like a set of, what's that? Yeah, the Davidic time period. Then there's the church age, then there's the tribulation, then there's the millennium, and then eternity. I don't remember. There's like these specific dispensations. Let me tell you how this plays out, though. All right, so I'm going to tell you how this plays out historically. And this made me, the first time I saw this, I just went, are we serious right now? So Dallas Theological Seminary has one of the better commentaries on Old and New Testament as a 2-volume set. Generally, those commentaries are not very helpful because they're too thin, right? There's just not enough material. I don't ever look at them because they're just so thin, they're going to comment on stuff you could already figure out by just reading the text for the most part. It does help some, but I remember I was reading DTS on the Sermon on the Mount, okay? Fairly common text, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. I'm like reading along, and I'm reading through DTS's commentary on Matthew. I don't remember why I was reading it. I think I was preparing for a Bible study or something. And back then when I was reading it, was before I was pastor, and back then I thought DTS as a commentary was great. Now I'm like, there's just not enough material there. So you need more material. But at the time it was fine. I was teaching Sunday school. And it was great for doing Sunday school lessons, just not as good for like if you're going to preach deep or teach deep. But here's what it said before going into Matthew and his commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. It said this, quote, loosely quoting, "This text of the Sermon on the Mount is for the church during the millennial period. The church will draw some information that is helpful for it now, but Jesus intends this for the 1,000-year reign kingdom when he comes back." I couldn't believe it. Now, I immediately went to Luke's commentary in the DTS 2-volume set because Luke also has the Sermon on the Mount. And it's the Sermon on the Plain, but it's the same information. So I went and read, and that guy doesn't say that. So which is weird because that's a pretty big claim. It's the claim that the Sermon on the Mount is primarily for the church during the millennial reign. I mean, it's beneficial now because it tells us some stuff, but during the reign of Christ, it will be the law of the land, will be the Sermon on the Mount. That was basically the idea, and I couldn't believe it. To me, it was such a leap. Like, where in the world does this person draw this? And this is what happens if you're a strong, stout dispensationalist. Every verse in the Bible is about dispensationalism. I find this about hyper-Calvinist. I find this about hyper-preterist. Anyone who's hyper, there's not enough Ritalin to keep them from every verse they read being about their theology. That's just the way it works. So you can't unhyper them. I mean, just no way to, they have ADHD and spiritual ADHD. And no matter what the verse is, this is about the millennium. This is about the pre-tribulational rapture. This is about the 7 years of tribulation. Every verse in the Bible is about it. I have to be careful because I ask myself the question, okay, well, where's my attention deficit disorder spiritually? Like while I'm preaching, what themes do I obsess over so that we don't get the whole Bible, right? So we all have to ask this question. But dispensationalism is almost identical to premillennial, but they have a pre-tribulational rapture of the church is almost always built into dispensationalism. And these dispensations, they tell you, here's how people encountered God here, and here's how that dispensation works. And then from Moses to David, this is how God worked. And then from David to here, and these dispensations are periods of God's specific interaction with humanity during those time periods. Understand? Like, I think I'm describing this correctly. Whereas premillennial are like, there's the Bible, and there's this coming in time. It's going to be trouble, tribulation. Jesus is going to come back. Rapture will happen. And then the 1,000 years will reign with Jesus on earth. Dispensationalists like, well, yeah, this is true, but what about from Adam till Moses and the law? What are we doing with there? What about from the law till the Davidic kingdom? What about from David till John the Baptist starts preaching? What about after Pentecost till the tribulation, that kind of thing. So it's very specific on those. Covenant theologians don't like dispensationalists. Dispensationalists don't like covenant theologians. One of the most caustic books I ever read was a book by a preterist who wrote a book entitled Dispensationalist, Rightly Dividing the People of God. And it was caustic. And I was like, that's funny that was the title, because the most divisive book I've ever read was the book about dispensationalists being divisive people. It was like patently, obviously contradictory. Like you wrote a book about dispensationalists being divisive. You call them divisive in the title, and you're divisive throughout the entire book. And to me, it was just like, does this writer not realize how ironic it is that they're writing a book about the divisiveness of dispensationalists by being extremely divisive themselves? It was just weird. I read the book, and the whole time I felt uncomfortable with it. I was just like, he was making good points, but it was so caustic that I just went, okay, stop. I don't have any interest in that. So I don't like caustic theological debates. I don't mind theological debates. I don't like caustic ones where people are super harsh, because I'm just like, nothing's happening here that's positive. People are just getting mad. So anyway. All right, full preterism, which... this is the only view I will tell you I think borders on heretical. It says all events occurred already by AD 70, including the tribulation and the return of Jesus and the resurrection from the dead. It says we live in the post-resurrection period now. This indefinite church period, which will go on forever and ever, will never end. When people die now, they spiritually go to the presence of Jesus, but there's no more resurrections, no more bodily experience in heaven for anyone after 70 AD. Yeah, it's a real hopeless theology. I mean, you get the spiritual experience of heaven, so I guess that's nice, but if you want to hug your loved ones again, it's very holographic. Yeah, it's more ethereal. It's less physical. Now, before that, 70 AD, all those people got resurrected. So David, Moses, Peter, Paul, They benefited because they died before 70 AD, so they got the resurrection. So they have to, full preterists have to have John finish with the book of Revelation before 70 AD, because if not, he'll be in heaven without a body. And they don't like that. So they for sure have to have the book of Revelation done by 70 AD. Plus, they claim everything in the book of Revelation happened by 70 AD. So that's full preterism, noted by the Preterist Research Institute out of Oklahoma. Please stay away from those guys. They're not helpful. And every verse in the Bible is about full preterism. It's frustrating. They're like, what about this verse in Isaiah 12? Like, you're kidding, right? Like, there's an obsession with the book of Isaiah with that group. I had to go back and study Isaiah at a postgraduate work level to be able to have debates with them. I'm looking in the Hebrew. How's this word structured? What's the verb tense on this? I'm like, why am I doing this in Isaiah 30? I have other things to do. No one at Matthew Road is going to be worried about the grammatical structure of Isaiah 30 verse 3 or whatever. So I finally just had to give up on it, but it was frustrating. All right. Partial preterism, R.C. Sproul is a best example of this. The Last Days According to Jesus is his famous book on this. It's a very good read. I highly recommend it. I don't agree with him, but I think it's a very good read. Almost all end times occurred before AD 70, but there's still a future bodily resurrection of believers and unbelievers, and an ushering in of a physical everlasting life for believers and a physical everlasting hell for unbelievers. This view is similar to post-mill, but it takes the events of 70 AD as the significant prophetic event. So the millennium, they view things as post-mill, but like everything's already happened for the most part at 70 AD with the destruction of Jerusalem. Like I said, R.C. Sproul is someone in this category, and his book, Last Days According to Jesus, is a very good book. I've read it. I've read almost all these views by people, and including hyperpreterism, and I forget the title of the book, but it is Foundation Reset, or I don't remember like the exact phrasing, but it's a picture of a church with like this huge crack out of it, and it's like they're putting it back together, and they're going to put it back together with their full preterism theology. So some guy named Snow, and anyway, I forget, there's 4 authors to it. They had to revise it because one of the 4 pulled out of their views, said, I don't believe it anymore. So they had to pull that and make a second edition and put a different author in. All right, and then the last view is mine. I'm a typological preterist. I don't know if this is a real thing. I don't think it's a real thing, is it? Yeah. I'm a typological preterist. The events of 70 AD were real. My problem with premillennial dispensationalism and historical premillennialism is they don't take the events of 70 AD seriously enough. So that's my issue there. The events of 70 AD are the fulfillment of prophetic statements by Jesus, including in the Olivet Discourse. They are a type of the ultimate fulfillment that we see in the book of Revelation that are events still yet future. This view takes the events of 70 AD as significant prophetic events that Jesus himself described. However, this event holds that of future global events that will mimic AD 70, the local events in Jerusalem. This is my worldview. So I'm historical premillennialist, but I'm typological preterist, meaning I think 70 AD plays more role than historical premillennialists give it. Yes, Chris. Yes, I think 1,000 years is a literal 1,000 years. But I think there's a real tribulation coming. But I also think 70 AD was a real event. And this is what I don't like, is people try to match the Olivet Discourse with the book of Revelation as if they're the same event. And they also fail to separate the Olivet Discourse between the 2 questions the disciples asked. When will the destruction of Jerusalem happen, and what will be the sign of your return? They ask him 2 different questions. What happens in premillennialism or in dispensationalism, they marry the 2 questions together, force them to fit a pattern, and then try to parallel them to the book of Revelation. And in the process, what they do is they ignore the fact that Jesus is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. It's quite clear. This generation will not pass away until these events occur. I think it's really clear. Post-mill, on-mill, and preterist deal naturally with the Olivet Discourse. The Olivet Discourse makes that claim. What post-mill and a-mill and preterists don't do is acknowledge the separate of the two questions, where Jesus says, here's the sign of the destruction of Jerusalem and the sign of my return. And there's a phrase in the Olivet Discourse where Jesus shifts attention to the second question. And the failure to acknowledge the shift from the first question to the second question creates massive problems where either premillennial or dispensationalists make the Olivet Discourse try to fit with the book of Revelation, and it doesn't. And then it causes preterist troubles because they try to make the destruction of Jerusalem and the return of Jesus as a solitary event that has all already occurred. And the key to unlocking this is R.T. France's understanding of the Olivet Discourse, where he goes, hey, if you'll check the Greek right here, look, Jesus signals really clearly he's changed topics halfway through this thing. He's done with the destruction of Jerusalem. He's on to the second coming. And he says about the second coming, no one knows when it's coming. He told him exactly when the destruction of Jerusalem would come. He says, when you see the is violated, get out of town. This thing is going to end in the complete death of everyone. Get away. The church moved out as soon as Titus started to come to Jerusalem. Church got out of Jerusalem. Saved the church. So, all right, we're out of time. We got to pray. Y'all want to do questions next time? We can have at least a little further discussion about it, all right? I wanted to lay it out for you. Next time we can talk about them specifically, all right? All right, let's pray. God, you're good and kind. Thank you for your word. Give us wisdom and insight as we study the scripture. Amen.